it might be, I'm sure people would love to hear why you've got an interest in Christian schooling, why you're involved in Christian education, and why we do the research around that. And I think that's a good question to reflect on. It's a question that I want us all to reflect on as we begin. But I went to a Christian school, spent my whole schooling there, loved it. My wife went to the same school, that's where we met. We've got 5 kids. They all are at Pacific Hills Christian School. 2 of them have now left. I serve on the Board of Service Chair at Pacific Hills Christian School as well. And we've all got busy lives, and when you're volunteering in an area, on top of everything that you do, it has to be because you're pretty passionate about it. Also had the opportunity to step onto the board of ACS New South Wales. Again, just to be that voice, particularly for those lower fee schools and the Christian schools and the peak body of independent education in New South Wales. And again, with those roles, there must be a reason that one gives up time to do that. And I was just in the brief break after Ron's, he's the elder statesman, so when he makes a suggestion, I take it on board. And he said, if you wouldn't mind share some reflections on that. Well, the late 1970s, I was a little kid, and after church one morning there was this meeting. We were out the back playing, running around as kids, but there was this couple, and they said they've got the Lord's laid on their heart to start a Christian school. Now, no one knew really what a Christian school was back then. This was at the start of it all, of course. And he was an architect and she was a full-time mum, and they said, we've got a vision to start a Christian school, but we don't know anything about education. Well, my mum, so I was the youngest, so I just started school, and she was a teacher, but taking time out for the family. And they said, we're looking for a teacher to be pioneering with this venture we've got. I don't know where it's going to go, but at this point my dad's apparently elbowing my mum saying, you're a teacher, you need to do this. Anyway, long story short, Mum stepped up as the teacher. So 1979, this school begins, and there's 8 kids and 1 teacher, my mum, and then we all go along, and that was the start of the school I'm still involved in. And of course, I'm sure we can all remember, many of you, the 80s, because that was just the growth phase of Christian education across this state, across this nation. And they were the days, weren't they, such pioneering days, the working bees and the giving and the commitment that enabled what we have today, such a sophisticated sector having such impacts, but they were very humble days. As people, in great obedience and with great sacrifice, not knowing what the next week would bring, stepped forward to say, well, I can serve God in this way. And having lived through those early days and then experiencing the benefit of that as a student, I have become a raving fan of Christian education, and that's why it's an honour to serve the sector, because I see the impacts, and I see how God has used the sector. I was sharing some of the stats there. A church that doesn't go to church, but they can get equipped with these truths. We've got the freedoms where we get. I see it on AAS. This grant authority, the ability to fund schools with government resources to ensure that they can grow. And Christian schools get, because they distribute and steward that so well, get to be part of that. And it's just an incredible opportunity that we have to shape this next generation, now multiple generations. But still, that's not an answer. So I was just reflecting. I thought there were probably 3 things that come to my mind in the time that I had to reflect on this. 3 words that I guess sum up for me what I see in the Christian schooling sector. And then I'm going to throw this to your tables, and I want you to come up with and distill down what you see for you. But for me, the first is alignment. That I get to send my kids to a place where the values align with our values, where we don't have to finish each day and undo what they learnt at school or redirect because the values are so askew. Now, I guess in the 1950s, the 1960s, and maybe even into the early 70s, that wasn't as much of a big deal, because the Broad Street Australian view was quite aligned to the Christian worldview. But over the decades since, The Christian worldview has obviously stayed unchanged because it's built on timeless truth, on the rock on which we base our life. But the zeitgeist has shifted, and now the mainstream Australian views are a long way from that. And so that alignment of values, that consistency of upbringing, just the ability to reinforce the views that we have at home and the worldview we have through the schooling is so important. I finished school, Pacific Hills, and went straight off my first year to university, studied psychology and joined the army as well. And this idea that Christian education is a bubble and you get a cop it when you get out there into the big wide world. Well, the army is a pretty rough and tough place, and psychology is not particularly a Christian-aligned perspective, and yet I found a seamless pathway from school because those values in school and at home were reinforced. There was a consistency of worldview, a clarity of purpose, a coherency that was instilled through home and school, and that alignment is so key. Dr. Ted Boyce, the principal of Pacific Hills, I sat with him on lots of meetings with parents and others, and his simple view is, if you've got a limited pot of money for your education of your children, and you're thinking, I'm going to invest this at some point, but we can't go the whole way, he says invest it early. King, year one, you did everyone, and we see with the data of independent education, there are more high schools at independent schools than primary, because primary, we know that it's local, it's nice, with great teachers, it's a community feel. But from a worldview perspective, it's when they're young that those foundations are formed, and the alignment is the first there. And as I thought through my 3 words, I was just looking at ACS, and they all align with that, and I like them as well. So alignment was my first. And the C is for community. And I'm sure you see that your schools are communities, and I see that where I'm involved as well. Communities that are intergenerational. And it's great to see, and I'm sure you've got it as well. Now you've got parents of the school who were students of the school. You've got board members and those volunteering who have been involved in other ways over the years. You've got grandparents who have had this multi-decade connection with you. You've got students that are now working as staff members. This community is phenomenal, and a diverse community. I mean, this is not a homogeneous community, very diverse in background and denominationally, I'm sure, and different experiences. But it's a community that is aligned on the foundations of Christ, and that's what gives us that unity amidst the diversity of the community. And that is fantastic, and that is a model for our world. And it's a community that celebrates great joys together. We have our celebrations, our anniversaries and all of that, and great losses. I'm sure we've been to funerals or grieved the loss of students and staff members over the years, and planted trees in memorial and the like. And yet we have a hope, and it's the ups and the downs of community that life's about, and you get that in a Christian school, and that's why, in fact, that Eagles song, remember that Eagles song, Hotel California? You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave, right? That was one of the lines in that. It's a bit like that Christian community and school community. You're always part of it. I think that's fantastic. So, alignment, community. And the third one for me is spiritual formation. And that's what matters most in life, because that is eternal. And so much of everything else will come and it will go. When I was just starting business life as a youngster, excited and let's do this thing. And actually, he was on the board of Pacific Hills, but a bit of a mentor for me. John Craig was his name. And at one point, we were interacting, and he saw a young sort of whippersnapper in me, and moving into these entrepreneurial things. And I remember he put a hand on my shoulder once. He said, "Remember, all this stuff you're going to work for, all this stuff you're going to create and produce, all this stuff you're going to accumulate. Just have a picture of it, Mark." He said, "of it going on a conveyor belt just straight into a fire, because that's what's going to happen to everything that you accumulate." And it's quite sort of hollowing as you are beginning a business life to think of all of that effort you're going to put in, ending up ultimately as very temporal. Accept the things of the Lord. And that spiritual formation, therefore, is key. And that's what we want in our children. That's what's foundational, the education as we read. Physical training has some value. Educational input has, of course, important value, but spiritual formation has eternal value. And so that alignment of values as a parent, that community that is authentic and that spiritual formation that is timeless. That's what I reflected on as why I am so passionate about what you do, giving each day. I give a little bit of time here and there, but you're professionals in the space, leading your schools in that way and making such an impact on this nation. I commend you for that. So with that, let me throw to you at your tables to discuss what is it that you believe or your parents would say are the reasons for the distinctives of your schools, are the raison d'etre of your commitments, are foundational to your schools and why you put that effort in. Because there's an easier way to make a dollar. If you just wanted to pay the bills, you could save a lot of wear and tear if you just wanted a job. But you chose at great cost and at great reputation and leadership input your particular roles in your schools. Why? So let's discuss that, the distinctives, the impacts, the why of your schools. I'll give you just a couple of minutes to, maybe 5 minutes to share that together, and then we can move around, and that might be our first point of discussion. And it's coming at us at an increasing velocity. It's coming at us often from unknown direction, and we're just struggling to keep up with it all as it hits us. And elements of this future are all around us. The future, in so many ways, is here now. But if we continue the analogy of the future coming at us, I think we could flip out the word future and put Generation Z there, or Generation Alpha, because they really are a lens through which we can view the future. They are the inheritors of this future. Indeed, they are the ones that will have some input in shaping it as well. And they have been saturated in this era, in this future, in a far more profound way than we have. We wrote in this book, Generation Alpha, while the times affect us all, the impacts are greater when experienced in our formative years. The age at which we're exposed to a new technology or transformative event determines how embedded it will be in our psyche and lifestyle. You know that as educators. And in those formative years, experiences leave fingerprints on us. And so the technology, the changing worldviews, the societal shifts, the new morality, all of this is impacting them even more than it is us. We were talking about a post-structural world. We still bring our structured 20th century thinking to this fluidity of today, but not the youngest generation. This is the only world that they have known. And so looking at this context through their lens is important if we're to effectively connect with them, understand them, and educate them. So let's think about generational transitions, and this is what I want you to, in a moment, to discuss at your tables, and then we'll get some feedback from you. How is this generation different to the one that went before? We often say that people resemble their times more than they resemble their parents. Now, as Christians, we have an obligation to pass on the truth and the timeless realities, but how that's done, and the means and the methods and the context obviously changes, and in that sense there is more connection they have within a generation than we have with them across a generation, even though they're a progeny. I put down the workforce of today by generation. That's how it flows out. So a diverse workforce, and yours is no different to that. From baby boomers to Gen Xers to Generation Ys, we said the largest generation, but even the Gen Zs born since the mid-90s, and now 1 in 5 of the workforce. But if we wind the clock forward a decade, 2031, we'll have a 5th generation joining us, Gen Alphas. The students of today will be the workers of tomorrow. They'll be 8% of the workforce in 2031. We've got more generations in our workforce interacting. Obviously in our schools, that multi-generational community is what we see. And bridging gaps, engaging effectively, is our mandate. Now, what worked for the Gen Zs may not engage with Gen Alpha. What's been effective through the 2000s may not connect in the 2020s. We've got to observe these shifts and adjust accordingly. Not the values, not the times, not the relationships, not the rock on which we build, but in terms of how we engage. We are writing this book just about getting the balance between that nuance, and the strength of our schools, our organisations, is based on our stories and traditions, and obviously the timeless truth, but the relevancy of the organisation of the school depends on our innovation and adaptation. So we sort of lean back and take the values with us as we move forward and adjust. It's like Paul, and when he writes to the church in Colossians 3, he says, pray for us. He says, pray that God will open the door. The sovereignty of God will open the door for the message. And then he says, pray that I might proclaim it clearly as I should. So there's God's role and ours. There's the open door prayer, and there's the effectiveness action, and there's that responsibility for us to be effective even with the timeless truth. And so understanding the generations to engage effectively is the goal, bridging those gaps, recognising difference. A text conversation came my way from a Generation Z. A youngster, she had texted a friend and said, "Babe, are you working is legit? The hours are savage on." And we see a different lexicon of English emerging in response. Yes, Queen, slay girl, goat. I'm sure we need a Gen Z dictionary to decipher. I was given a translation which was great. Apparently the first girl was simply saying, "I like my job," and a friend was saying, "Great." I'm not sure why they didn't just say that. But that is to highlight the generational gaps, the need to remain relevant and adjust. So the second table discussion is this: how are the generations changing? How have they changed? And how does that mean we need to be innovative and adapt to be relevant and engage? Not the truth, not the timeless foundations, but the engagement, so that we've got the strength from the stories and traditions, but the relevance from the innovation and adaptation. So how do we need to adapt? How do we need to understand and engage this generation? Let's discuss that for a few minutes, and then we'll continue our feedback across the table.